I remember one song that he did that just blew me away, and that was when he did Moonlight Sonata. He did Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. And I remember just staring at him and looking down at his piano, and like I thought my eyes were deceiving me, I remember closing my eyes and saying, something's happening here, because I'm hearing, it sounds like a man's playing with two hands. And then I see him, and I see he's only got one hand, and the other one's paralyzed.
The grandmaster chess player who can defeat dozens of opponents in simultaneous play. The taxi driver who breaks just enough laws to get you to the airport on time. The tennis player who anticipates her opponent's every volley. Adults who perform a difficult task smoothly and skillfully. What do they have in common? This program looks for the answer in how they think, in what psychologists call the cognitive component of expertise. How does our knowledge change as we get better and better at something? That's the main question we'll address. But there's more to expertise than just the head. There's the heart and the hands and the sheer determination to do well. And so we'll ask about hard work and practice, about whether experts are born or made. We'll think about when in life we're likely to be most creative, and we'll be reminded time and again that an expert in one domain may well be a novice in another. John LaFond is 40 years old. Blind since birth, he suffers from severe epilepsy and is right spastic hemiplegic, which means the right side of his body doesn't function very well. When it comes to playing the piano, he effectively has one good hand and one good foot. In general, John is severely retarded, functioning at the mental age of a 2-year-old. Dr. Neil Charnas, a psychologist, has worked extensively with John LaFond.
Now, despite all these disabilities, John has a tremendous ability to deal with music. That is, he's extremely skilled at being able to play the piano or the organ with his one good hand. And he's found some very ingenious techniques for being able to develop fingering that would enable him to play both sort of the harmony and the melody lines of music that he's learned.
Jerry Dalton was a music coordinator, playing guitar and singing for patients at a social service center in Ontario when he was introduced to John LaFond.
It was in the fall of 1983, and my job was to go around to the different wards and sing for the clients. I kept on hearing from the different people on the ward, the different ward staff, saying about, you should hear this fellow play the piano, this client named John LaFond. And they said, boy, he can really play the piano. And so finally, curiosity got to me, and then I went and heard him play. And I suppose you could say I've been John's sidekick ever since. We need some harmony here, John.
Need some harmony here.
And you are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. I started playing on the guitar, and every song that I did, John knew. Like, I was doing all the old sing-along songs, Show Me the Way to Go Home, and You Are My Sunshine, and whatever key I was singing in, he just picked it right up, and he played in my key.
As his musical sidekick, Jerry became John's closest friend. They communicate the only way John can, through music.
How can I say it? I guess I talk to him almost like on a one-on-one basis, and I do a lot of hands-on, like when, after he gets through doing a song, and he does a really super job, I always got my hand on his shoulder and patting him on the back or grabbing his head, and kind of giving it a good old-fashioned rub. And I'm encouraged by his music, and I respond to it genuinely.
The cornerstone of John LaFond's ability, Jerry discovered, is that he's been immersed in music his whole life. On one occasion, the two of them were going over some songs together.
And then all of a sudden, I said,
John, I'm going to play you a song that you've never heard before, and I want you to listen to it. And it was a song that the only time I heard it was in our family. It was an old folk song my dad taught me. And so I started playing it, and John sat there for maybe about the first verse. The second verse, he just started, he started playing right along with me. And I was just shocked at it. I bet you there's not two other people that I've crossed paths with in my 40 years here, my 40 years alive, that knew this song. It was just, I thought it was an extinct folk song. And here John's father knew it, and his father taught him. It's the same song that my father taught me.
Professor Charnas.
If you were a small child, disabled in the sense that you can't move around very easily, you're blind, so you can't see much in the world. So your only major source of interaction is through hearing. And if it's your left hemisphere that's damaged and hence somehow prevents you or blocks you from being able to pick up the code, the grammar that underlies the language that people speak to you, then perhaps music is something that is going to be very attractive to you. And of course, when we interviewed his parents, that's what we found out. He started to play piano about the age of 3, and he'd spend literally all day at the piano playing, practicing, trying to make sounds on the piano. And as a result, over the literally thousands of hours that he spent in front of the piano, he's able to perform extremely well, extremely successfully in that domain.
In fact, John and I have written a song together. It just happened by accident. I had this melody in my head, and I couldn't get rid of it. And I was coming into work that day, and I played it for John. I said, "Listen to this, John." And I said, "I want to go somewhere else with it. I need a middle 8 for it." And so he just started playing around, and then all of a sudden, boom! He just went right to another chord, and it turned out to be the bridge of the song. And then and it fit. It absolutely fit.
That's all I need to know. Whoa, it only happens to the very young at heart. When I first met you, I knew right from the start. There's a full moon tonight.
When we're doing a song that John really likes, I notice that he'll be playing, and then all of a sudden this great big beautiful smile comes across his face, and I can see it like nobody else can see it if we're just in the room together, and just watching him smile, and I know that he's just really happy playing that song.
John LaFond has specialized very successfully in one domain, music, while having very little ability in others. That tells us something about the nature of expertise. Professor Charnas.
Well, I think what it seems to indicate is that people can specialize very, very narrowly. As I mentioned before, he's fairly severely retarded, and part of the difficulty is that he's blind, so it's difficult to give him tests. But as an example, he doesn't properly understand the difference between, say, the concept of big versus little. He can't tell apart successfully a circle from a triangle from a square. Or to use another example, it took about a year to teach him a technique to be able to wash his hands successfully, a 5-step operation. On the other hand, it seems as though he's built up an enormous repertoire of music, popular music, classical music, opera, a whole range of different areas of music.
People refer to John LaFond as a musical savant and sometimes think of him as a human tape recorder, but that's not how his mind works.
Let me go back a bit and suggest that the modern folklore about musical savants is that they can hear a piece once and then reproduce it perfectly, much like the case of Mozart, or at least that was reputed for Mozart as a young child. When we tried those sorts of experiments where we had artificial melodies that we produced that were reasonably long, we found out that John's note span was about 5 notes to 8 notes. As if you played a sequence of notes randomly arranged, that's what he would reproduce accurately. It was longer than that. The only time he was successful is when the notes were organized in some sort of musical structure that took advantage of the structure of Western tonal music. The sort of music that John's been listening to all his life.
John LaFond doesn't have total recall. Rather, he recognizes and remembers familiar structures, patterns. In this, he's like experts generally. It's not that experts have a great advantage in hardware, that they process information more quickly innately. It's something else. And the clue comes from an experiment designed for chess players. It appears that grandmasters see differently. They perceive patterns, and because of that, they remember better.
We show a structured chess position to two players, let's say a grandmaster and a novice or a weaker player, and ask them to attempt to reproduce the position on the board in front of them. What we find is the grandmaster will reproduce virtually all 30 pieces correctly, and the novice perhaps 5 or 6 pieces. Yet when we now take those same positions and scramble the pieces so that we have a random configuration on the board instead of one that's structured but unknown to the master, we find that the novice and the master perform absolutely equivalently. It's not that the master had a superior working memory or short-term memory capacity, but rather it was something about the experience he'd had in chess that built up a large repertoire of patterns, estimated, for instance, in chess to be on the order of 50,000 recognizable chunks.
It takes as much memory space to store a pattern of positions as it does to store the position of an individual piece. Hence, if you store patterns, you store more. Plus, you have room left over. It's because experts perceive underlying patterns and structures that they remember better. John LaFon's memory span for individual notes is not unusually high. Where he excels is in memory for patterns of notes, for melodies. But is this true of musicians in general?
Well, in music we found similar sorts of things. Again, if we do these rapid perception tasks, that if we deal with structured material, we find that there's an advantage for the highly skilled musician. If we deal with random material, no, the advantage goes away. This all seems to indicate that experts are those people who have built up a large vocabulary of patterns, a large knowledge base, and that they aren't fundamentally different than you or I in terms of some sort of innate abilities.
As they build up a storehouse of patterns, experts become intuitive. They instantly recognize the structure of a situation and know exactly where it's heading. All kinds of experts show this characteristic. Accomplished tennis players, for example.
They know that when I force my opponent into this position on the court to make a shot, the chances are the shot that's coming back is of this type and it's going to be at this angle, and so they can anticipate and move to the position where the shot is likely to be.
The same is true in hockey.
Very early in Wayne Gretzky's career, his father taught him not to go to where the puck was, but where it would be after it hit the boards. He was trained to anticipate how things would develop. And this is part of what we call, I guess, the intuitive expertise of the master.
That same intuition is found among chess players.
It's sometimes called in chess grandmaster intuition. So the grandmaster has seen so many of these situations in the past and knows that when a particular plan is organized around that situation, that most of the time it's going to succeed. And so he chooses the correct things to look at in the search tree, whereas the novice goes off onto irrelevant branches of the problem space.
It's like becoming a good driver. You have to encounter enough situations over the years to know instinctively what to do in the rare emergency.
The idea behind specialization is that there is a specific production tuned to every specific pattern that's likely to occur. And I think that explains why it takes such a very long time to become an expert. The estimates are that it takes on the order of 1,000 to 10,000 hours to become a top-level performer in a given field. And the idea is that when you inhabit a particular domain or operate in a particular domain, it takes a long time for rare patterns to occur.
And knowing the rare patterns gives experts a final quality, flexibility. Experts are better able to act quickly when things don't go as planned.
So someone will know a fair amount, but might not yet have the domain organized as efficiently as the expert does, and hence isn't going to be as flexible or know enough about alternative methods and alternative representations to solve the problem as effectively.
In their domain, but not outside it, experts perceive differently and remember better. They act intuitively, automatically, and flexibly, and all because they've built up a huge storehouse of patterns. From the standpoint of thinking, that's what it takes to make an expert.
The real moment of truth arrives when you're in a situation alone that you haven't seen before, and that you're put on your own to solve that particular problem.
Think of critical expertise, the kind possessed by men and women whom we trust with our lives. Dr. George Zeidema, professor of surgery.
The major problems are the ones which really advance the field a giant step. The little ones are the ones which measure whether you're successful in saving people's lives.
Is the knowledge system of a surgeon like that of a hockey star, or a chess master, or a John LaFond? Or is there a difference when lives are at stake?
Part of the answer here is thoroughness, and one of the definitions of a specialist is the individual who does the rectal exam. And that's simply an indication of someone who is so thorough in their evaluation that they don't make assumptions. They personally examine the patient, and they personally see the patient and take the history, and so that their decisions are based on their own eyes and ears and sensation.
As a one-time student of surgery, and now in his middle 50s as a teacher, Dr. Zeidema is in a unique position to see the difference between novices and experts. What happens when medical students and interns first begin to diagnose problems?
When they work up a patient, they will furnish you with a list of the diagnostic possibilities and suggest perhaps a dozen or more tests that might be used to rule in or to rule out some of these diagnoses. Well, at the same time, a skilled diagnostician can see that patient and recognize that although there may be 12 possibilities, that 2 or 3 are more likely, and that a simple test or 2 may be all you have to confirm that. And if the top 3 or 4 possibilities fall away, then the chances are that you may be dealing with a zebra, and then you start to look further.
A zebra?
There's an aphorism in medicine that when one hears hoofbeats, one should think of horses, not zebras. The skilled diagnostician will have an open mind, however, and will catch the occasional zebra, and this may be the distinguishing feature between the skilled individual and the pedestrian.
So skilled diagnosticians work more quickly to the heart of the matter. Their experience frees them up to be on the lookout for the rare occurrence, the zebra. They can see how a situation is developing. Like Wayne Gretzky, they head not for where the puck is, but for where it's going to be.
I think that the expert does have a good view of the flow of disease. He can recognize the early symptoms and the physical signs associated with that and make the diagnostic connections fairly early in that whole trajectory. Whereas the novice will take the first step and say, oh my goodness, we have this finding, this finding, this finding. Now this can be a whole assortment of possibilities without really seeing the whole picture unfold. So you have to kind of recognize the early warning signs that may be indicators of full-blown disease. If you wait until the whole manifestation is there, you may wait too long.
When it comes to performing surgery, skilled physicians find the technique becomes almost second nature. This allows them to look ahead for possible complications.
Well, the basic technical ability which one acquires is based on experience. The more often one ties knots or cuts sutures or dissects out a given organ, the better one gets at it. At some point, you reach the level where it's easy, where it flows, and where there's a facility which is almost automatic. The individual performing the procedure will be likely to be thinking ahead. As a result, things will move along more rapidly and more comfortably and probably more safely.
While there are subtle differences across domains, the knowledge systems of a wide range of experts are surprisingly similar. These systems are organized around patterns, and patterns make for efficiency, which becomes critical when a zebra suddenly appears.
I remember one situation when I was beginning my surgical training as an intern, and a young boy, an 18-year-old, came into the emergency room with abdominal pain on his right side, and everyone agreed that he had appendicitis. Yet when the incision was made, He proved to have a very unusual situation, actually turning out to have a perforated cancer of his right colon.
It was, in Dr. Zeidema's words, a moment of truth.
The case immediately became upgraded, and the senior surgeon who had begun by helping me with the case wound up doing it, and I was able to help him and learn a lot about being flexible.
Accomplished musicians and surgeons think differently than beginners do, but there's more to their skill than just thinking. There's motivation and determination, and inborn talent, being gifted. How much talent is involved in expertise? How much hard work? Are experts born or made?
It's much as your music teacher used to say, practice, practice, practice.
Professor Charnas.
It takes a long time to become an expert, and it looks as though there are no instant experts. And the estimates of 1,000 to 10,000 hours should warn you that it's going to take a very long time before you're going to reach high achievement. On the other hand, the work is also, I guess, very reassuring in the sense it suggests that perhaps anybody, and even people who've got all sorts of disabilities and handicaps, could become an expert if they devote the time. And certainly, I guess the good story is it looks like masters are made, not born.
I think that in part they're born.
Dr. Zeidema.
Because I think there's a basic technical gift which is an important part of the surgeon's makeup. I think that it's very difficult for someone without that kind of interest and perhaps that kind of touch, if you want to describe it that way, to be successful. They can master the technique of surgery, but even there, I think you need a certain disposition to be able to handle the instruments and the suture material and do it comfortably and gracefully and without clumsiness. And the ones who are born to this have a natural affinity for it, are able to absorb this very readily, and maybe on the basis of 2 or 3 years of experience will reach a level of competence that others may take 5 or 6 years to reach.
And that raises another question. If it takes so long to become an expert, when in life are we likely to be at our peak? When is a person's masterpiece, his or her greatest accomplishment, likely to come? Professor Charnas.
If you looked at the discoveries, important scientific or whatever, across a variety of domains from weightlifting to billiards to musical composition to writing plays, most likely your greatest achievement is going to be made when you're in your 30s, in the decade of the 30s. But that varies a bit from discipline to discipline. It's a little earlier for mathematicians. It's later for historians, as you'd expect. History, you need a greater knowledge base, takes more time to build that up. Mathematics, you may need fewer facts before you can go to work and produce interesting theorems.
Chances are your masterpiece will come in your 30s, but the peak years of creativity vary not only from one domain to another, but from one person to another.
The thing you don't want to overemphasize is that it's not that your only achievement will be in your 30s, or that there aren't exceptions to the rule. And one looks at people like Miguel Cervantes, who produced Don Quixote, I think in his late 60s, early 70s. Well, the example of people who become artists or novelists late in life. So I wouldn't rule out all hope if you haven't won your Nobel Prize by the age of 30 that you won't get one.
As they approach the end of life, creative individuals may produce a different kind of work. Not a grand masterpiece, but something shorter, sweeter, and simpler. A swan song. According to psychologist Dean Keith Simonton, that's what composers of classical music appear to do. In his research, Simonton found that works produced near the end of life were indeed shorter and simpler than works produced earlier. Later life compositions weren't as original as earlier ones, but they were judged to be more profound, and they eventually became more popular. They seemed to represent the essence of the composer's style, kind of a last will and testament. We don't know if swan songs exist in domains other than music, but they make us aware that expertise lasts for a lifetime, and that it goes through seasons, and that what sustains the skilled individual may not be so much winning the prize, but rather loving the game.
I have never found anything that I would rather do. I enjoy people, I enjoy science, and I enjoy the practice of medicine. And as far as I'm concerned, only in surgery can you put all of those elements together and have the same level of satisfaction.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, boom.
The ditty song, Play Me a Little Ditty, that's one of John's favorite tunes. He loves playing it, and that's one of the songs I was telling you about where he smiles, a great big smile comes across his face. It's magic. It's magic for me knowing that he loves the song as much as I do. And the way he plays it and he gets right into it, that makes it very special. Very special.
Psychology has learned a great deal about the thinking side of expertise, about the mind. It's the building up of a repertoire of patterns that enables skilled individuals to perform effortlessly, intuitively, and flexibly. Most of us are or will become experts at something important to us. Everyone has the potential. But in realizing that potential, we have to remember the other side of expertise, the practice, the years of hard work, and, for someone like John LaFond, the love. Expertise comes, in part, from the heart.